But back to tonight. So we have an exceptional treat in store this evening. We have with us, and it is a great honour to have with us, a poet coming all the way from America, Brenda Shaughnessy, author of 5 collections in the US, but who has just published in the UK with Bloodaxe her new and selected poems. So it's really exciting that she's crossed the waters over here. And joining her is Neil Astley, the founder and editor of Bloodaxe Books. And Neil will, as I say, introduce Brenda and also be in conversation with her after Brenda has read poems. So there'll be an introduction, poetry reading, conversation, and some time at the end for questions. So you can start to think about what wonderful, insightful comments or questions you want to make at the end. The adjectives used on the back of this book to describe Brenda Shaughnessy's work, I think, give us a hint of what's to come. Unsparingly fierce, well, that's an adjective, and an adverb, I suppose. Reverb soaked, dark, sci-fi, and unprecedented. And we are absolutely delighted to have this chance to host such a remarkable writer. So I'm going to make way for Neil Astley to say more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tara. Well, Brenda Shaughnessy is one of America's most audacious and thrilling poets, and her first UK publication, Liquid Flesh, as you've heard, is a new and selected poems, and it spans 20 years and 5 collections published in the US, plus new work. Brenda was born in the US and grew up in Southern California. Her mother was Okinawan, that's the islands between Japan and Taiwan, and her father, Irish American. She's won many awards, including a Guggenheim. She's a professor at Rutgers University and lives in New Jersey with her husband, the poet Craig Morgan Teicher, and their 2 children. And I'd like to thank Craig for the work that he did in helping us put this book together. It was very, very helpful. Since her debut with the sexy swagger of Interior with Sudden Joy in 1999, Brenda Shaughnessy has honed a poetic voice rich with contradictions. Her poems are simultaneously tricky and blindingly honest, sensual and grief-stricken, coy and utterly self-possessed. She's a moralist with a profound sense of play, taking the patriarchy and the malevolent powers to be to task. She's omnivorous and fearless, even as she stares down her terrors, whether the blaze, fizzle, or explosion of wild love between women or the unquenchable pain of a son's birth injury. She celebrates, too, reveling in the pleasures and powers of the body and the transcendence of art. Beginning with the youthful love lyrics of Interior with Sudden Joy, the book moves on to the wily reckonings of Human Dark with Sugar, and then the unsparing, fierce mother love and parallel worlds of the reverb, already mentioned, the reverb-soaked coming of age and coming to consciousness of so much synth. Then the dark then the getting these all mixed up, fierce mother love and parallel worlds of Our Andromeda, and then the dark sci-fi prophecy of the Octopus Museum. And all these books are selected from in this marvelous new and selected poems. And at the end, there are new poems that pay homage to women artists and their path-breaking art. It's an unprecedented body of work, unlike anything else in contemporary poetry. And I'm sure you're going to have a great treat listening to Brenda reading for about half an hour before we have a conversation and before you get to ask your own questions as well. And the book is $14.99. So as the publisher, also, I have to say, tonight we're making it available to you for £10 only. So very easy to buy it. And we can even take credit cards now. So do buy and get them signed afterwards. So, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Neil. I am grateful beyond words to you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tara, and thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure and a joy to talk about poetry with people who like to read poetry. But are people poets here? Yes.
A lot more who put their hands up.
Yeah, awesome. That's so great. So, what if I had a whole different selection of things to read now that I know that there's so many poets? Neil, that was a beautiful introduction, and now I feel extremely nervous. What do I do with unprecedented? I look at each poem and I think, well, I already wrote this, so it's precedented. Visitor. I am dreaming of a house just like this one, but larger and opener to the trees, nighter than day and higher than noon, and you, visiting, knocking to get in, hoping for icy milk or hot tea or whatever it is you like. For each night is a long drink in a short glass, a drink of black sound water, such a rush and fall of lonesome, no form can contain it. And if it isn't night yet, though I seem to recall that it is, then it is not for everyone. Did you receive my invitation? It is not for everyone. Please come to my house lit by leaf light. It's like a book with bright pages filled with flocks and glens and groves and overlooked by Pan, that seductive satyr in whom the fish is also cooked. A book that took too long to read, but minutes to unread. That is, to forget. Strange are the pages thus, nothing but the hope of company. I made too much pie in expectation. I was hoping to sit with you, in a treehouse, in a nightgown, in a real way. Did you receive my invitation? Written in haste, before leaf blinked out, before the idea fully formed. An idea, like a storm cloud that does not spill or arrive, but moves silently in a direction, like a dark book in a long life, with a vague hope in a wood house with an open door. I think we need something funny. I think we need to lighten the mood. This is a true story. It's called A Poet's Poem. This is for all the poets in the room. And I guess watching the video later. A poet's poem. If it takes me all day, I will get the word freshened out of this poem. I put it in the first line, then moved it to the second, and now it won't come out. It's stuck. I'm so frustrated. So I went out to my little porch, all covered in snow, and watched the icicles drip as I smoked a cigarette. Finally, I reached up and broke a big, clear spike off the roof with my bare hand and used it to write a word in the snow. I wrote the word snow. I can't stand myself. I think that we're in trouble here with many things, with advanced capitalism being one of them. It's so very advanced. It's circled all the way back around to primitive. This is a poem that is too much, just like us. Our beloved infinite crapulence. In Indiana, in the era of hell wealth, way past deadline, someone on the account is sweating it, making metaphor from what is already a stretch. And because he wants to go home to his farm-fresh slowpoke foam, grown cold, we are eventually diagnosed with winter and treated to this marketing copy off a tube of cream. Undry your skin, or a rainforest for your face. I bought it. It seemed fresh and felt organic and like it would at least wetten me skin-wise. I can't feel my old ambition to be racked with anguish or to grow soft with loss. When I lose, I'm still so graceful. Does that make me a chump or a champ, eating victory mussels in the lamplight of my domestic tranquility? Gratitude often leaves me with nothing to say, as when I saw you in the toy store, I felt like a feral cat who knows only the dumpsters and the flu-scented sandboxes of now. Now that I am happy, I suppose I have to break my own heart just to feel something. Another person with my same name goes around impersonating others. Now everyone thinks I'm the imposter. I want to tell her, you think you know me. Sipping mahogany cider in the millionaire's billiards room. But there's such a thing as too much umami, and there's no way to rest forever and then go on. Someone once said, now that I'm happy, I suppose I have to break my own heart to feel something. I should remember that. I should stop praying to my dead self. I should pull out my earbuds and hear the world, my first love, my favorite store, without continually moving my oiled jaw hinge. I like a chemical mysticism performed with perfect innocence. The wet slit lit up and cut down the middle, a little spit, lip a little bit split. Love in the candle shop, wicked. Peeing into a plastic water bottle, wasteful. These are scents. As in, luck be a lady, so spend your whole Social Security check on a lottery tickets, be a gentleman. I want to smell like ceramic wind in the canyon, a brittle lust, a red-headed remedy synonymous with flooding. Weather vane rusted stuck, a stranger's phalanges, the south mouth, fiercely phlegm, fun old lady, so parachute. And now we eat, the eponymous eating. Don't want butter, don't want salt. Dinner is thinner, but it's not my fault. We're having fungal celebrity of beef cheeks tomorrow, so get yourself hungry. For lighter fare, I prefer the soapish fish, braised in its own frothing broth, served with an aromatic retraction of statements previously made in the shade of a giant genetically muddled with fiddlehead fern, infused with expelled chipmunk breath. I love this local company, especially because for every order, and this is so cool, they make a tax-deductible contribution to honor and support the world-famous Pacific Garbage Patch in your name. This is a very new poem. It's not in the other books. It appears for the first time here in this one. Moving far away. I shouldn't say that it's the latest one, because what if it's bad? That's not a good direction.
It's not bad.
But now that you've said that, what if, well, never mind. I hear they're trying to make borders in water now, to declare it a place, impose a shape, dissolve the solvent. It's no solution to our probable problem. I'll never see you again, I say on my cell, said to myself. We'll be well below alone now. Can I be a good friend to you if I move so far away? Haven't seen you in years, but I like a rough edge. Island broken off a big bully. I'll use up all my firewood on you. Sorcery? What turned into me? An iron foot, a leg of log, a wish for symmetry? My fire handed down to me by cauldron witches in their longish unauthorized youth. Broken crest rising, rinsed of desire, full of pull and push, no rush to finish or to vanish. As if water didn't wave and bring tidings and answer me like an animal, jealous, crushed, washing herself. I'll never forget you told me never to forget, but I did. Your voice, a needle threaded, heading for my open wound, already burned clean for a clean split. It's like when you break up with somebody. Just send them this. There actually are quite a few breakup poems in here. If you wanted to, you could break up with someone by copying out one of these poems in your own hand and pretending it was theirs. They'd be like, are you leaving me or not? Artisanal. Bring your own bread, your breath, your own mouth, open all night. What wouldn't I give to fill it? I can't see my breath, yet catch it again and again, like a magic coin I use to buy myself back from the self-chamber box. That dank fromagerie, again and again. In its dark robe worn open, the night, blind prince of the black cat, has a page for us all. What wouldn't I give to fill it? Such is the dreary, unwritten history of hunger, of what to say to stay alive. We don't write it down. We can't keep it down. Why bring it up? Burn it all down. Make it new. A real writer makes do. Famous last words. Not even ink makes the best ink. Wine better spreads a stain, and the mouth is already wet. The better to contain a fire, or catch a fish, or tell a story, sharpening the point of the last meal. That incredible question. Star of dread. My own words. Eaten like a cheese requested for the death of it. Ending my sentence and the one after it. There's always one after it. I'll read you from my first book, which was written in the last millennium, which sounds like a long time ago. It sounds like I am a dinosaur fossil being put back together incorrectly right in front of you. This is jouissance. Your phantoms hang neatly from skyhooks, ready to be veils, ready to disembody you. You have shelled yourself of this curved room, and the smell is of burnt door. Slack belly, hot. It is an abattoir, lacking its usual firmness. Your ordinary sweet kinesis, peevish in the crumble and whetstone of your body. And so you go. Every city has a place called the Roxy. Go. To keep from the quicksand of this unbearable curl, tender Leviathan in the last window, crimson facing west. How could you? You are Gundella. You are anyone's Maria. Electric to perishing, your more auxiliary lovers, like pralines or quaaludes, cannot touch you. No teasing or lockjaw. Caustic. All of you, even shadow, must be bullseye. Your shaggy, skeptical quasar has died the way Andromeda dies, so very late at night. You are disenchanted. You are all rain collected, in a butterfish sack, opaque and draining. The description of this you hold under like a genius in dark water. So I mentioned in that poem Andromeda, which then something like 18 years later, I went back to as a theme and sort of made a whole collection based on that idea. It's interesting seeing your body of work out over a long period of time because you can see all the little pieces that were sort of threaded through. And basically you can see your obsessions laid bare. And you're like, I guess I've never really gotten over the idea of Andromeda. I guess I better write a whole book about it instead of mention it once in a poem. But there's something nice about that. It kind of feels like I only have the 5 themes. Don't have to deal with 100,000 themes. This is Dear Gonglia. The most inscrutable, beautiful names in this world always do sound like diseases. It's because they are engorged. Gee, I am a fool. What we feel in the solar plexus wrecks us. Halfway squatting on a crate where feeling happened, caresses. You know, corporeal gifts besmirch thieves like me. But she plucks a feather and my steam escapes. We're awake each night at penny moon, and we micro and necro. I can't stop. But love and what all? The uncomfortable position of telling the truth, like the lotus, can't be held long. If she knew, would she just take all her favors from my marmalade vessel and chuck them back into the endless, reversible garment which is my life? An astonishing vanishing. Gee, I know this letter is like a slice of elevator accident. As smart folk would say, everything is only nothing's truck. I would revise it and say that everything is only nothing truncated. Love, your Igor. So I have a time machine. You're looking at it. You all have one too. It's kind of nice to realize we don't have to rely on other people to provide us with the technology to get a time machine. We are. Time machine, c'est moi. I have a time machine, but unfortunately, it can only travel into the future at a rate of 1 second per second, which seems slow to the physicists and to the grant committees and even to me. But I managed to get there time after time, to the next moment and to the next. Thing is, I can't turn it off. I keep zipping ahead. Well, not zipping. And if I try to get out of this time machine, open the latch, I'll fall into space, unconscious, then desiccated. And I'm pretty sure I'm afraid of that, so I stay inside. There's a window, though. It shows the past. It's like a television or a fish tank. But it's never live. It's always over. The fish swim in backward circles. Sometimes it's like a rearview mirror. Another chance to see what I'm leaving behind. And sometimes like blackout. All that time wasted sleeping. Myself, age 8, whole head burnt with embarrassment at having lost a library book. Myself, lurking in a candled corner, expecting to be found charming. Me, holding a rose, though I want to put it down so I can smoke. Me, exploding at my mother, who explodes at me because the explosion of some dark star all the way back struck hard at mother's mother's mother. I turn away from the window, anticipating a blow. I thought I'd find myself an old woman by now, traveling so light in time, but I haven't gotten far at all. Strange not to be able to pick up the pace as I'd like. The past is so horribly fast. I did want to read one for my son Cal. Suddenly I just thought of him. So I have a 15-year-old. I have 2 kids. I have 11-year-old Simone and 15-year-old Cal. And Cal has pretty severe cerebral palsy and doesn't speak, and he can't really feed himself. So this was written at the occasion of my, I got a chance to go to a writer's residency, and I was finally free of all of them. I could do whatever I wanted to, meaning I could write without having to take care of children. And so I was there, and I couldn't write, and I was furious at myself. I thought, what's wrong with me? The conditions are perfect. Right. And all I could think of was this scene that I had just gone through, which was a couple weekends before. I had thrown a 6th birthday party for my daughter at a gymnastics place, and we were, tables and pizza and garbage for them to eat. And I brought all this fruit. And apparently, when I was finally alone, able to write, all I could think about was this scene. All I could think about was this kid who couldn't stop eating the blueberries. It wasn't my kid. And so I felt like I had to write this poem in order to get it out of the way to write other poems. It's also sort of the title is based on a beautiful children's book. I don't know if you know it here. It's called Blueberries for Sal. You know this? It's about a mother bear and a baby bear cub, and then a human mother and her child get switched while they're eating blueberries. This is Blueberries for Cal. Watching little Henry, 6, scoop up blueberries and shove them into his mouth, possessed. I'm so glad I brought blueberries. Wish my kids could eat them. Cal can't. Simone won't. Henry's sisters, Lucy and Jane, took turns feeding each other goldfish crackers and sips of juice, arms around each other's neck and back. Tiny things. I wish my daughter had a sister like that, and my son a nervous system that let him walk and munch berries. Sometimes I can't bear all the things Cal doesn't get to do. I want to curse everything I can't give him. Admire, compare, despair. That's not the most real feeling I'm feeling, is it? I feel joy in Henry's joy. Blueberries for the child who wants them. There's all this energetic sweetness, enough to go around, to give and taste and trust. More than enough. For Cal, too. I want to remember this. My children seem to subsist on music and frosting. Where there's frosting, there's cake. Where there's music, someone chose to make a song over all other things on this earth. This is my second to last one. It's called Identity and Community. There is no I in C. This is a true story, too. I actually went all the way to Hawaii so that I could go swimming in the ocean in the Pacific and write poems. And then I got all the way there, and I got to the ocean's edge, and I was completely so scared. And I suddenly, then at that moment is what I'm thinking, sharks, jellyfish, everything. And I thought that was a really strange thing. Have you ever done that? Just completely shocked yourself with a moment of strange self-sabotage or just, I don't know, negation? I don't know, it was like that. Hopefully you can relate. Maybe I'm totally alone in that. I'm not, right? Thanks. Identity and community. I don't want to be surrounded by people, or even one person. But I don't want to always be alone. The answer is to become my own pet, hungry for plenty in a plentiful place. There is no true solitude, only. At seaside, I have that familiar sense of being left out, too far to glean the secret. How go in? What an inhuman surface the sea has, always open. I'm too afraid to go in. I give no yes. Full of shame, but I refuse to litter ever. I pick myself up. Wind has power, sun has power. What is power's source? There's no privacy outside. We've invaded it. There's no life outside empire. All paradise is performance for people who pay. Perhaps I'm an invader and feel I haven't paid. What a waste to have lost everything in mind. Watching 3 mom-like women try to go in, I'm green. I want to join them. But they are not my women. I join them, apologizing. They splash away from me. They're their pod. People are alien. I'm an unknown story, erasing myself with seawater. There goes my honey and fog, my shoulders and legs. What could be queerer than this queer tug-lust for what already is? Who already am, but other of it? Happens? That kind of desire anymore? Oh, I am that queer thing, pulling and greener than the blue sea. I'm new with envy, beauty washing over itself, no reflection, no claim, nothing to see. If there's anything bluer than the ocean, it's its greenness. It's turquoise blood mixing me. I was a woman alone in the sea. Don't tell anybody, I tell myself. Don't try to remember this, don't document it. Remember, write down to not document it. I'll end with a poem called Artless, which is a funny word, right? Most people here like, this is sort of a strange contronym. Sounds like it means without art, but really it used to mean guileless, without art, without artifice, genuine, natural. But I feel like we think of it now to mean like, ugly or not considering aesthetics. At the end of each tercet, the tercet ends with some variation, with the word less in some form. Artless. And before I start this, I want to say this is my last poem, and thank you so much for being here and for listening. I can actually feel this room is good. I can feel the responsiveness, and I'm very grateful. Artless is my heart. A stranger berry there never was. Tartless, gone sour in the sunroom or moonroof, roofless. No poetry, plain. No fresh special recipe to bless. All I've ever made with these hands and life, less substance, more rind. mostly rim and trim, meatless, but making much smoke in the old smokehouse, no less. Fatted from the day, overripe, and even toxic at eve. Nonetheless, in the end, if you must know, if I must bend, wasteless to that excruciation. No marvel, no harvest left me speechless. Yet I find myself somehow with heart, aloneless, with heart, fighting fire with fire, flightless. That loud hub of us, meat stub of us, beating us senseless. Spectacular in its way of not seeing, congealing, dayless but in everydayness. In that hopeful haunting, a lesser way of saying in darkness, there is silencelessness for the pressing question. Heart, what art you? War, star, part? Or less, playing a part, staying apart from the one who loves, loveless. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, for that.
You're so
wonderful
welcome.
Reading. So I've prepared, I've got 4 questions here for you, but they're quite long, quite dense. But I've been trying to sort of encapsulate the various feelings I have about your poems and what I've got from working on your book. Now, each book of your books is very different, but there are themes common to all, and some common to some only. The body, illness, pain and pleasure, family, children, motherhood, home, fear, vulnerability, human frailty, normalcy, in quotes, trauma, the planet, the divided self, femininity, sexuality, desire, queerness, and tenderness, devotion, love, bitterness, and rage. So could you say something about how you managed to pull all those things together in your poems, because they go through all your work?
I counted 22 things. I don't know who said this. Was it Frost who said, "You mean you want me to talk about it in worser words?" Yeah, because
How conscious are you of
It's too
actually
much.
pulling those themes together all the time?
not conscious at all. Not conscious at all. Like I said, it's until the process of this book of pulling everything together, I didn't see all these through lines and callbacks. I thought you think every time you're writing a new poem, in fact, you suffer over that. You think every time it's the same blank page everybody faces, and it's the same exact taunting hell. It's like, what are you going to do now? Are you going to write something good? Are you going to write something terrible? Or something in between, which is maybe even worse. No, I write what this portal that opens up sometimes lets in, and whatever flows from that like magical tip of the pen lets through. But mostly it's a sort of, I don't want to say the word alchemy. It's a metabolized question, a question that I don't know the answer to. So I never ask a question that I know the answer to, because that's bullshit, right? You can feel it as a reader. You can feel like this poet is answering a question so that I know how smart they are, because then they're going to answer it. And that's what they want. That's what the poet wants. And so you can't ever ask a question that you know the answer to. You can't know. And you're learning how to find the answer through writing it. So all those things that you talked about, those things that you mentioned, they could be reduced. Tenderness and queerness, or tenderness and love, or many things that you sort of put words to could be sort of smushed together. And really there's only 3 or 4. There's only 3, right? Love, death, and the changing of the seasons. But I don't usually judge sort of what I'm going to be writing. But usually I'm mostly despair. And usually I'm annoyed at myself, as I sort of mentioned, for having poems about my children in my head. I'd rather not write about them. I think it's a boring topic. But done something, questions I have about them seem like the truest and most pressing thing. So I go for it. But I think in various ways, no matter where I am in my life, there's a brokenness here and there that comes to mind and sort of stands in my visions or stands in my way. And it's that brokenness I have to address at that time. Sometimes it's about sexuality. Sometimes it's about cruelty and just the cruelty of this world. And sometimes it's about panic about the climate crisis. And sometimes it's motherly despair. Sometimes it's existential fear, but mostly it's whatever the flow demands me to pay attention to. So I don't like plan it.
Okay. Next question. There's also, as we've seen, that fanciful sci-fi element in some of your work. You also wrote a libretto for an opera about an AI proto-human and the scientists who created her. And astronomy and parallel worlds are features of Our Andromeda. And in the Octopus Museum, octopuses are imagined as overlords of a near future world, which octopuses have taken over human civilization. And I understand that one of the inspirations for the Octopus Museum was reading Emily St. John Maddell's post-pandemic novel Station 11, written and published just before we had our own global pandemic. And that must have fed into poems like Our Family on the Run in the book, as well as the whole octopus thing. And there are poems about fear and monumental anxiety. So how do you view that collection now that science fiction has become science reality, even if we've not yet had an octopus takeover?
I think we're in the middle of an octopus takeover. I wrote the octopus takeover because I felt like it was the second worst case scenario. And what we were doing, it really is like, what if we mess up the octopus's ocean so badly that we sort of, in an act of kindness, provide them with sort of salinated tanks on land, and then they take over everything. It's almost like maybe they should. Maybe it's better if they do it. We've certainly messed it up. Maybe they'll do it better with their brains are in their tentacles. Their nervous system is different. It's not centralized, so maybe we would need less centralization in our world. What was the question?
Well, I think you've answered it.
They're essays. These questions you have.
Okay, next one is about the tensions between poetry and experience as you see them. And you've said that we're conditioned, especially women and people of colour, to be afraid of our own voice, and that we have to undo that damage within ourselves, to undo our rage and fear. And you tell your students, live your truth. That's how you can write your truth, know what is true for you. But you've also said you've learned to mistrust your feelings. And I was wondering if you'd say something about how you reconcile those opposites in your poetry.
You know, I used to sing my infant son to sleep. It was the only thing that stopped him from crying. He cried day and night. He cried all the time. And only my singing would stop it. But it had to be full on. It had to be full, I had to do basically, the full Broadway thing. And I lived in an apartment in New York, and I was if I heard steps in the stairwell, I'd be like, don't let anybody hear you. God, don't let anybody hear you. That's got to be horrible. What a horrible thing to have to hear someone singing like that. I wouldn't want anybody to overhear me because I'm not a singer. And so I would sort of go, rock-a-bye baby, try to do a little, and he wasn't he'd scream. It's only if I really sang. And I thought well, he likes it, he likes this singing voice. And I realized I was afraid of the sound of my own voice. I was so afraid that somebody would think that I thought I was a good singer, and that's why I was singing. That was the worst thing. That someone might mistake me for having misguided sense of greatness. And I thought that's kind of how everything is with us, isn't it? It's people tell you can't be a poet, or you can't be a writer, or you can't be an artist, or you can't do anything. You can't be a musician if you don't already know. If you didn't start when you were 2, forget it. If someone didn't tell you when you were like an embryo that you have real natural talent, don't even bother. Don't even bother. It's like, it makes no sense. I mean, we're told you can't do anything unless you're already good at it. And I started taking singing lessons because I thought, this is stupid. Why am I afraid? Maybe I just find out what it is. What is it? What is it that makes a person sing? And I learned from my teacher that what makes an individual voice unique is just sort of the air behind the nose bones, the shape of your diaphragm, the way that air pushes through your system. And then it catches on a kind of emotional range, emotional possibility that you might sing with a kind of emotion, or your feelings get involved with it. And that's what creates the quality of sound. And I thought, well, don't we all kind of deserve to experience that? What is the pressure on it being good or bad before you even open your mouth? I didn't want to be afraid of my own voice. And I thought, I have been a poet for years before this. And I would travel places and read poems and do all kinds of things like that. And I was still afraid of the sound of my own voice. I'm still afraid of what its registers are. I'm afraid of sounding shrill. I'm afraid of sounding bossy. I'm afraid of sounding like a know-it-all. It's like, enough. Just freaking write, just write your stuff. And the question of being an expert or being a pro or being sort of, trying to be so good at something, trying to be so excellent, I think it's bogus. I think it's bullshit. I think that we have to just honor the shape we're in, honor the voice we've been given. If somebody told you that you sound like like a goose or something, that's their problem. That's your goose voice. That's all you got. You might as well speak, right? So that's kind of I don't know how I feel about the concept of sort of developing over time. That my goal is not to get better as a poet or not to get sharper and stronger and more precise and more musical or whatever. The music's in me. It's just there. We all have it in there, just like we all have our time machine. Like, your heartbeat is the thing that has always set your individual music. And I just want to listen to mine more. And I want to not keep questioning every thought. Like, maybe a thought that I have, maybe I can write it down as a line of poetry and look back at it later and say, I don't have to improve that. Why is that thought not worth being in existence already? So I totally forgot the question again.
Well, you've answered it. That's fine.
Okay, as long as I answered it somehow.
My last complicated question is, you're also unusual as a poet in being a married woman with a husband and family, at the same time with a lesbian queer voice that's central in your poetry. Does that come from a belief in that human choice and artistic freedom involve a full range of ideas, possibilities, and fluidity? You've said all poems are love poems, all poems are political poems. The act of choosing to write about what matters to you is a potent act of resistance against what the fundamentalist right would like to kill off.
Right.
So I packed 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, definitely. Well, about being sort of identifying as a queer woman while also being married to a man, it used to cause speculation. People don't give a shit anymore. But at some point in my 30s, it was like, how is this possible? And I think that mostly it's possible because I think that I came of age at a time when it wasn't okay to be queer, when it wasn't okay to come out as a lesbian. I came out as a lesbian in the early 90s, and I came out again as a bisexual later. But in the 90s, you couldn't be. There was it was illegal, and you could get killed or imprisoned for it. It was just, and it's still like that now. And I feel like it's very important to. I will always come from that experience. I will always come from the experience of feeling like I believe that sexuality should be expressed in terms of like who you love and who you want to be with, period. And if it's a man or a woman, or if you feel like you're changing genders, it's kind of nobody's business. And even though I have this what's called heterosexual privilege. I mean, like I walk through my life as a married woman, and it's I know how much privilege it is. I don't there's a kind of danger I'm not in anymore, and I recognize it, but that doesn't mean that danger should ever have existed. Queerness is about a nonlinear way of life. It's about a nonlinear way of seeing desire and existence. I think I love as a queer person, even if the person I love happens to be I'm in a heterosexual relationship. And I think that's because I got in trouble for saying this once, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm going to say it. I think Virginia Woolf said that she felt that writers were bisexual because you have to be able to understand other desire systems in order to be able to write about them. That you can't just be like, society tells me I can only think in these particular ways about who I love, where my heart goes, who I'm attached to, who I think about. And so that's where my imagination stops. I'm really only ever interested in the imagination and being pushed as far as possible. And queerness is one of those places where our society has put up these blocks and said, you can't think outside that. I hate that. I think it's against art. I think it's cruel to human beings, and I don't think children should be raised with this idea that you have to love in any particular way. I think that poetry needs to sort of be on the vanguard of always of that idea that that we're about the full expression of human everything, desire, wit, pain. I mean, if we can't say it, who's gonna, that if we can't say it, then we're all just so alone. And I don't think we should be alone when there's poetry in the world, when there's art in the world that can, speak to our inner lives.
Well, thank you, Brenda. Wonderful answers. Does anyone in the audience have any questions they'd like to put?
I do.
Yes.
I have lots of questions. Limit myself to one. Thank you very much for a wonderful reading. Fantastic reading, and what's really exciting is when you listen to a poet and words kind of start to jump up and become alive, and like, for example, that last one that you read where with the less, I never knew the word less could mean so much and so many different things, and it's exciting to hear you read, so thanks very much. My question is just a really basic one, curiosity. You mentioned that you went to this writing retreat and you couldn't write, and then you wrote the poem about the blueberries to kind of get it out of the way so you could write other poems. Yes. And so I was just wondering, did you write other poems, or did you continue writing the blueberry poems, or did you get it out of the way, and was there something else waiting there?
Yeah, I think I wrote almost all of the Octopus Museum, almost that entire book, the whole sci-fi section. It was almost like I had to get away, like really get rid of the vestiges of my responsibilities at home, and like sort of think through a scenario and kind of, that poem is hopeful, right? It ends on a hopeful note, saying even if your kid is really robbed of so much, there's still so much. And so in order to alleviate the tremendous guilt I felt about leaving them with my husband and the caregivers to go do this writing thing, and then I think my psyche felt free then to sort of go a little bit wild. And that's when I at that retreat is when I read Station 11, and I read all these books about octopuses, which are the closest thing to aliens that we have. Maybe you know this. It's kind of amazing. We're like, where are the aliens coming? It's like, they're here. They've always been here. They came of just a different stardust and evolved in such a completely radically different way. So it was in that quietness, in that solitude, that I was able to imagine all of these other ideas.
That's fascinating. It's also like a reading and writing. So there has to be reading and writing.
Always. Yeah. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Writing does not happen without reading. It is a conversation. It is not just I'm speaking. It isn't that. It is I am responding. I'm always responding to what I read, and I have stacks. I have I think 7 or 8 books going at the same time at all times. My husband Craig gets really annoyed because I do this, and then they're stacked up like that, so that I can figure out where I am. And I have bookmarks, but then I don't know what happens to them. Where do they go with the extra socks that don't get matched? But always reading all kinds of things: theory, nonfiction, memoir, poetry, novels, old books, new books. I'm reading Jean Reese's Good Morning Midnight. You are? It's sort of hell. It's awful, but it's amazing. It's like, this book doesn't, what does this book have? This book doesn't, this book. But it's very Natalia Ginsburg, right? It has a kind of, anyway, we should talk about that later. But no, it's always a response. I think if we're writers, we're in this great conversation. It's centuries and centuries old. When we read books and poems by people who lived a long time ago, they're speaking directly to us now. And we're speaking back to them when we write. It's incredible. It is a time machine. Literature is a time machine. And I think that it never happens without reading. If ever you're stuck and you don't know what to write, you have to just bump up your reading and say, I'm not going to write anything. I'm just going to listen. And before you know it, it's like the flow is going to come because you want to respond.
Thank you. Does anyone else?
Yes.
Thank you. But okay. Thank you for the reading. It was wonderful. I just had a small question about the themes that were addressed in your writing. There was a certain set of themes that, as Neil mentioned, often recur in your writing. So while writing the poems, do you have a particular audience in mind? I mean, while some of them are very, they can be more relatable, others might be specific to a certain audience. So while writing about them, do you have a certain audience in mind that you're writing for, or do you shape it as it goes and see how it ends up?
Yeah. The audience, like I sort of just mentioned, is usually writing back to something I've read. This is going to sound so like I'm very woo-woo. Do you have that term here, woo-woo? It means sort of, yeah. To the universe? I don't know. It's sort of like I want to write. It's kind of like to whoever would listen. I imagine a person who might listen to this, and they don't really exist because this person would be very long suffering and not your average human person. It's kind of I almost never write to a specific person, but more of a composite, almost like a composite me, if that makes sense. I had a bunch of poems in I think in 2 books, which was Letter to My 22-year-old self, Letter to My 25. It was like me writing back to my former self, which is a great exercise. If you are 22, then write a letter to your 17-year-old self, and imagine that you're going, and what are you going to say to that person? It's kind of like that. It's almost always a person who is a version of me, but who knows different things, or is not looking at certain things, and I have to, sort of fill in the blanks. But it's also, there's also a kind of new sense I have now that when I write, which is like a sense of documentary, get it down, write what you're thinking right now, to preserve it, because I'm feeling like that sort of I think the pandemic heightened a lot of our feelings of this isn't how it's going to be for very long. The end is near, whatever the sort of feeling we have, that sort of foreboding. It's almost like, write this down now, because we don't know if it's a given that this particular set of circumstances is going to exist. So how do you feel in the circumstances? What are they? And I think that was, for example, in the poem about being by the ocean side in Hawaii, where I was like thinking, well, this is weird. Why have I done this? Who's going to listen to this? I'll write it down and make sure that exactly the quandary is inscribed. It's a sort of a sick belief in some kind of inscription, meaning some kind of permanence of some kind, even though I know that doesn't really make any sense. But that's what literature is, right? We still believe in it. And so it's just me believing, it's me writing to another me that believes in that. But in terms of like audience, like other people, I had to stop being concerned with it because, of course, maybe some of you young poets understand this. You can't write if your parents are still alive because you can't have them seeing all of your business in your poems. So then you start like, trying to not say them. And then here's what you do is you send your poems, you send your parents your packet of poems that you've been writing. Just take out all the drugs and sex. That's separate for your other, that's your other poetry that they don't have to see. But stuff like this, where you're like, what if my parents see it? It's a big problem for writers. It's not just, a lot of people have this problem. And so I had to stop writing for any person because then they're going to judge me, And it took a long, long time to get out of that sense of like, what if somebody thinks that and instead replace it with what does the universe want? What does the former me want? What does the future me want? What does the moment require in terms of documentation? And what does the moment require in terms of inscription? What does memory require?
Thank you, Brenda.
Yes.
I think, don't think we've got time for any more questions, have we?
Oh, well done for keeping an eye on it. I was just totally
Yes.
mesmerized. I thought keep talking. Nobody needs to go. Yes, I suppose we'll have to wrap it up. But I was just so interested by what you were saying because it reminded me of that brilliant story that you have about singing to your son. Was it your son you were singing to? And then the neighbour outside listening in. And that's what that's the audience. I'm saying I'm no longer afraid.
Oh, it was a fear of the neighbor listening in.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So you had to stop the fear.
Yeah.
So it's the same as stopping the fear of no one's listening except one of them. Who needs to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Absolutely. What a fantastic reading. Wonderful conversation. Thank you very much, Neil, for those questions as well and wonderful answers.
Thank you.
Round of applause, please. For